All right, so let's call the meeting to order. First up, do we have any public comment or items not on the agenda? Great. Doesn't look like there's any. Oh. Is that you, Melinda? The like fifth person down in Zoom, or was that?
It might be me.
Oh.
Yeah, there's two planning and zoning people there,
Okay,
so.
it doesn't look like we have any.
No,
One
no,
is not
it's
a-
A lot of planning and zoning.
So, all right, then let's get right into the short-term rental discussion.
Okey dokey. We kind of put together some data and, had, Bela, Stenke, Matt's, transportation, or Matt's intern for the semester from UVM. Kind of put it together in a nice fact sheet. And, did you all get a chance to take a look at it? I thought she did a really nice job with it, and so the idea was to compare, to kind of. Compare a bunch of different towns, including Williston, with regard to short-term rentals, both, here, I'll bring it up. Both, the relative number of short-term rentals, relative to owner-occupied housing and rental housing. And just like some of the regulations that these towns had. I sort of, picked some of the towns that were, short-term rentals have really kind of taken off, and all of these communities except for Williston have regulations now, regulate, short-term rentals in some form or other. And then you can see the numbers relative to long-term rentals in those pie charts, where the blue is long-term rentals and the red is short-term rentals. And I had Bela sort of organize these in order of like least percentage of short-term rentals to the most percentage in ascending order. So Williston, well, not quite because South Burlington is 2.4% of short-term rentals relative to long-term rentals, and Williston is 3%. Winooski is 3.7%. And then you can also see some of the provisions in their respective regulations alongside.
There was one piece of information that wasn't helpful, which is the average price per average income per unit, because it, depending on how many were short-term, how many are long-term, the numbers are. I started to say, whoa, how is
This
that?
was just for short-term rental.
Oh, the average monthly revenue per home is
Yeah.
not for all?
No, just for.
Oh,
short-term.
okay.
Oh, okay, it appeared that it was for all.
So we
Yeah.
probably need to relabel that because that's what I thought too. I thought it was
Yeah.
all rentals.
No, just short-term, yeah. And then you can see like some towns, Woodstock and Manchester, the short-term rentals make up a substantially greater percentage of rentals. And then when you get to Stowe, there's many more short-term rentals, active short-term rentals.
It makes sense also though, right? There will be short-term interest, right? People don't live there to work there, right?
Not as much, or it's just much more lucrative
Yeah,
to operate something as a short-term rental.
And the people who do work there can't afford to live in a short-term rental.
Or long-term rental.
Or long-term rentals.
yeah,
Okay, it's helpful to know that that number was for short-term only.
yes.
Wow, 6,000 a month.
Yikes.
Yeah,
No
and
wonder
then,
there.
and then finally, the whole town of Peru, who the short-term rentals. Well, actually, yeah, the relationship is really skewed, and there's about 3 times as many short-term rentals as long-term rentals.
Is Peru a ski town?
Yeah,
But their total number of rentals is not that high.
No, it's not, it's very small. But anyway,
Right, and they're a town of only, what,
yeah, very,
800 or something?
yeah.
531.
Oh, there you go.
I just looked it up because I didn't know much about it.
But, yeah, like a kind of a ski tourist town.
Oh, it's right next to Manchester.
Yeah, and it's around the
Near
corner from
Manchester.
Bromley,
Mhm.
yeah.
so.
And Londonderry
Um,
and Weston.
so anyway, I thought it would be helpful to look at that before you took the survey. And I put some other resources up there, for you to take a look at if you wanted to. But if you would like, I can just go to the survey and present you the results.
Before you do that, can I make a comment about the reference materials we read beforehand?
Oh, yeah.
The first couple were from the association, the nonprofit that's really an association of people who do for short-term
Yeah.
rentals,
Mhm.
trying to ameliorate the bad effects of them. And so I found that there was useful, somewhat background and if we're trying to mitigate things that way, we would, but there's the underlying assumption that you want short-term rentals
Mhm.
and then to mitigate their bad effects.
Right.
And I'm not sure I want to start from that position. The white paper that the last link was very even-handed. And on page 4 and 5 of it, they list these are the problems with short-term rentals, and those are the thing I'd almost like to start from. How do we avoid those problems?
Mhm.
Rather than start from, we're gonna have short-term rentals, how do we regulate them?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Fair enough. All right, so let's just go right to the results here. Okay, so, yeah, so this was the perception of the impact of short-term rentals.
Trying to remember the number from our intern's work, the number of short-term rentals in Williston.
33. And I'm not sure, I'm assuming that includes the Sonesta.
I can look right now and tell you, it's kind of gone up and down.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
I'll take a look while you're doing that. I see.
So top 3 concerns, impact on neighboring properties was up there, impact on long-term rental housing supply, that seemed to be the greatest concern. And then, a little bit of safety of the visitors, impact on town services. And other, I guess I'm curious as to what other impacts people came up with. I guess four answered, or there were 4 others. Oh, Shayla.
So I was one of the ones who had an other, and maybe it's sort of captured an impact on neighboring properties, but I think the thing that I don't want is large swaths of Williston where nobody lives there. Or even if you have you get, I don't know what the exact proportion is, but you get X proportion of a, street or a block that's short-term rentals and not long-term rentals or home ownership. Doesn't matter if it's long-term or home ownership, right? And then those people are not investing in the community. They're not going to school, doing the things that are going to be important for long-term community stability. So again, I also chose impact on neighboring properties, but I didn't really mean, there's issues of noise and there's issues of parking and there's issues of whatever that I think more of as that blue category. And I think that the living here and what it's like to live here and what it feels like to live here could be impacted if we have a large proportion of short-term rentals, including, the experience of, again, schools and whatever, local participation.
I'm another one who listed other, and for me, it was the town of Williston have to manage them. I don't want the complexity of trying to set up a whole thing to manage them. Nor do I want the town services to be taxed by dealing with complaints from areas that have a lot of short-term rentals.
Mhm.
So to me, it was to avoid the short-term rental, avoid all the things on pages 4 and 5 of the white paper.
Huh.
Which to me means not having as many.
Mhm.
Um,
Jill has her hand up.
Mine was connected to kind of the long-term housing issue, and it was around if people are focusing contractors and businesses and like the supply chain of people who will renovate things and turn, apartments into their duplexes, those types of things. It's like you can't then have those builders and contractors working on long-term houses for people who want to live and reside in Williston. And if you talk to anyone who's trying to build anything from a porch to a deck, it's a long wait already. And I think just being conscious of that, of like, if you're not someone who's doing a huge build like a Snyder, but you're someone who is just trying to either fix your own home and you're a resident, or you're hoping to build a home and you have land, but now people are doing short-term rental things on their own land. I just think it all kind of, it's working in competition. So I don't really know, kind of fits in the long-term housing thing, but it's its own problem. And one impacts the other.
I also put other there, and I think my concerns are kind of a blend of Shayla's and Jill's. I I live next door to an Airbnb, and I really wish I had permanent neighbors there, and a family, because it's a very small little 3-house, private drive, and one of them is total strangers all the time, and so I feel like I can't really, that's not really part of my community, and there have been a couple issues, and that's been frustrating, so I would love to have that available either as a long-term rental or for sale for a family, or a household of folks who are gonna put down roots and actually contribute to the community, and build a relationship with nearby neighbors and all of those things. Yeah,
And those
so
are likely self-selected, really good short-term renters.
what's that?
I would guess that the people who are in that short-term rental are self-selecting people who are responsible and good neighbors otherwise. Then if you would think that that would not be the problem ground, isn't it people that are doing things with the Adriatic Center?
It's also on Airbnb, yes,
Okay,
it's
so it's
both.
not just.
But we've also, it's kind of a communication issue, but we've also had people walk into our house 3 times. Including when we weren't there. And, we're just really glad our dog was mellow. And because they didn't have communication about where they were supposed to be going and that kind of thing. That's a very unusual one-off kind of issue. But it does show, and it's like, okay, well, lock your house all the time. And I'm like, okay, but there's like, that's not that kind of community that I bought into. So, anyway, so, yeah, but I just, I come back to Sheila and Jill's comments about, and I totally value Chapin's thought too, about like not having a huge bureaucratic kind of monster that has to be, constantly overseen and managed. So, yeah, there wasn't an open-ended spot for that question to put.
Yeah, now I realize
Yeah.
that now. Oh, well.
That's fine. We had a good conversation.
I thought once I said other that it would then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so too.
What's your other?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I guess I
Right.
neglected to do that. Anyway. And then with respect to STRs, the town of Williston should 0, do nothing. And then do nothing but continue to monitor STR activity and its impacts. Establish an STR registry, establish a registry for all rental housing, including STRs. Establish a registry with fees and STR regulations and other.
Am I correct that people could choose more than one on this,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
I'm one of the others, and I have actually written down what I would propose.
Okay.
So when we get to discussion time, I can share that.
All right.
I think I was the other on this
Mhm.
one, and I think my other was around like being more lenient for owner occupied.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
acknowledging that Williston has such a like imbalance of bedrooms to residents, so if, you know, if you're living in a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house with a couple, like you should be able to rent those rooms out with
Yeah.
less concern.
I agree.
Right on.
I really like that, Ellie, because I'm not actually worried about owner occupied, and I do want to allow that so that, people who want to age in place can do so. There's lots of reasons that seems fine, and it does not erode community, and it does, make a difference in terms of controlling the problems because obviously the person is living there too. So I agree that that's either, we could really crack it down and limit it to just owner occupied, or we could say, if you're owner occupied, go to town, have a ball, and then be more strict with be very strict with the non-owner occupied.
And I think with non-owner occupied, I think that there should still be some sort of requirement that like there is a point of contact, like 24 hours a day. Even if it's, I don't know, in the county or something.
Yeah, a local,
Yeah,
Mhm.
we saw that
Yeah,
as a thing that came up in some ordinances.
Yeah.
and it was on the association's recommended regulations, they all covered that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so these are just sort of, some of the options, if the town were to establish any regulations. What should they include? And then there's pretty much consensus on annual fee and registration.
How
Um,
many people took the survey?
What's that?
Were there 7?
Everybody did, yeah. Mhm. And then, a cap on the number of STRs per owner, cap on the number of STRs per property. A cap on the number of STRs in Williston. Require owner occupancy. Require inspections, maximum occupancy per STR, and 2 others.
I don't think I was another this time.
Hmm? Anybody remember?
I
Yeah.
might have
I can't
been,
remember.
but I think it was the point I just made about having it requiring a local
24,
contact.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
I feel strongly about that cap on the how many STRs someone could own. I think that's when you get in those issues of like Redfin buying up like Shayla's concern of a whole area. Or we had a house, a single family home that was what you would think is affordable in Wilson, went up for $450,000. It was a formerly owned by, a woman who was an aunt to another neighbor down the street. And a Willistonian bought it. They live in a house in Williston. They bought that as a rental. Now it's an Airbnb. But they also own another house. And so they own 3 homes in Williston, and 2 of them are short-term rentals. And that became one of those, full-time jobs for one of the people in the family. And that's tricky because it's like that's a house that I know a lot of people would have been really competitive for because that's cheap for Williston for a single family home. And then it's just, it's gone poof in a neighborhood. And I think, if because if you're earning $6,000 on that property every month, your ability to then pay cash up front to buy another short-term rental is going to be much higher than a family who's trying to pay their rent every month and bring their kids to daycare. And I just think that you get into situations where, again, these houses are then sitting it's mostly vacant except Thursday through Sunday. And then we see people walking a dog we don't know up and down the street, and all that kind of stuff starts happening. And it's not, it's not an irritant, and it doesn't impact my life, but it's a bummer because it could have been a new neighbor.
Yeah, I think if we're on this slide now, and I think that was alongside of my comments, like it seems like, we only have 33 short-term rentals right now, so it's not an enormous problem, but it seems like it would be a deterrent to an investor, whether that's a big investor coming from out of town, which we're seeing increasingly more, maybe not specifically in Williston, but like across the country, coming in, buying up properties, getting some sort of manager for it, and like that's taking away from, a person or a family who's trying to buy their first home. And so I think what we talked about, having owner occupied, like, I think like that's a really great option for putting home ownership more like in reach for certain, like it makes it easier if you're like, well, I have an extra room I can rent out, or even helps put in the infrastructure that maybe it's not a short-term rental forever. But I think having some allowance for short-term rentals means that the space is then carved out for when like Airbnb won't last forever. Like it will get increasingly regulated, but it means that we actually like had a little bit of space that we regulated for the physical structure, so that if they shift into long-term rentals or even different ownership agreements, like the place is there. But it does seem like we want to have some deterrent to having some sort of investors buying up swaths of properties that could go to first-time home buyers, that would be here and be in the community.
Oh, I got a question though. Do we think this 33 that we talk about are under declared? Should it?
Talk about what?
I do think there are more of them.
I think a lot more than 33 though.
Oh.
Right?
I've looked
Do you
on
think-
Airbnb and there aren't a ton, but there are a handful. But it's not like it's not a ski town, it's not Burlington.
And-
But I don't know if it's underreported.
There's so many ways to informally
Yeah.
do it through like Facebook groups and,
Oh.
it's kind of impossible to.
Or do we know though what is a hotel occupancy rate is in those hotels that are in the town?
So hotel occupancy rates in Williston are actually quite a bit higher than the statewide average.
Okay,
Running, I think it's in the high 80% range right now. Where the statewide average is about 65-68%. So there is a ton of hospitality demand in the area. We've had hotels, age out of being used as hotels. We've had hotels become shelters. And we have hotels that are popping up to house temporary workforces that come to the state to do all kinds of things because those folks don't live here anymore. So, when you see a road crew working on Interstate 89 now, those folks are all, part of the bill for that project is putting all those folks in a hotel for the duration. We're seeing a lot of that demand here in Williston. So a lot of white pickup trucks in hotel parking lots during the week. So I think there is a lot of demand. I think what I'm hearing is a strong focus on the entire home that gets rented out. And probably quite a lot more flexibility for the person who does a short-term rental through an ADU. I've inspected a couple of ADUs that people established where we asked just informally, what are you gonna, rent this to somebody or do an Airbnb? A lot of people say, I'm just gonna do an Airbnb right now. I'm around enough that I can manage it, and I actually don't want to live with a tenant right now. Cause I don't want to deal with some of the complexities that come with being a landlord. And, there are some policy things that are pushing people that way too. So right now, for like entire home that's rented as an Airbnb, I think we're seeing 3 to 5 of those in Williston right now. It's a fairly small number, but I think Jill's point about one of the most common times when someone purchases one as an investment and turns it into an Airbnb is often that small, what would otherwise be a starter home. It might be a home that has some characteristics that make it less expensive, like it's a 1 bathroom, or it's it's not as accessible as something else, or maybe it needs work and that's a way to to fund that, so. You know, it's a really, really by the numbers, small effect. But there's only like one affordable starter home that comes up for sale in Williston about every 3 years right now, so. You know, I can completely understand the policy focus on wanting to put some friction on that, as far as, you know. Having those turn into investment properties, so. Shayla's got her hand up.
So we think there's only like 3 to 4 whole home.
That are an entire home, yeah.
I mean, so I guess I am the comment about enforcement is a concern to me because I know you guys don't have capacity. And so we do need to do something here that is very simple. And you know, registry and fee, that is work. That's not work for staff. I mean, that is, you know, yes, it's like they have to do it themselves, but people have to like, they'll have question, whatever. There will be work with that. So I guess one question I have for staff is what is doable with the current staff structure? And I'll already say, I was thinking, which is radical, but my radical thought is if there's not a lot that's doable with the current staffing structure, given the resistance in Williston to adding to the budget for more staff in the town, then we ban it. And we say you can have it, totally fine to do short-term rental if you're owner occupied. And otherwise, we're really sorry, you can't do it here because we don't have the staff to manage the issues that crop up.
You're previewing my suggestion.
So, you know, really briefly. The staff commitment to just run a system where we figure out, you know, let's say we're targeting ones that are a standalone home. You send those people a letter, you need to register now. You need to register or you're in violation of the ordinance, and I would recommend this be adopted as an ordinance, not zoning, that way you don't have any legal nonconformity issues, it's just like everybody's in the pool. That's pretty minimal for staff time. I mean, I'd be comfortable with an ordinance that names the zoning administrator as the person who manages that. You need to register, you know, it looks like you're running a short-term rental. You need to register it with us if you want to do that. You need to do that every year. And so that little tiny bit of just like, you need to register, maybe you need to attest that you only own one. Something like that, fine. The neighbor complaint stuff. Is incredibly time consuming. So when you add to that ordinance and Airbnb operators shall ensure that nobody who rents from them ever makes undue noise or causes an access problem on a driveway or litters or whatever. Now we're in a whole other world. It's like once you have the town enforcing a standard of behavior of any kind, that stuff, like there is no legitimate zoning complaint that comes through this office that takes less than like a 1 week FTE time commitment to handle. By the time you get done talking to everybody, if you actually have to undertake enforcement action, if you actually have to write it up and describe the situation to the town attorney, heaven forbid, go to court and testify, et cetera, like it becomes a major time commitment.
That hasn't happened here, has it?
Very quickly. And also what I would say about enforcement of any kind of like behavioral standards is, your average citizen has a really high and frankly unrealistic expectation of how that stuff's gonna get resolved and how quickly it's gonna get resolved, and like, you know, I mean, go talk to our police about the amount of theft that happens despite it being illegal in town and despite it being something you can be arrested for. So So registration and tracking and like, hey, you didn't re-register, if you're still doing this, you need to re-register, or you could be fined, like that stuff is, that's basically a database and a paperwork exercise, and there's a little bit of wrangling around it, but probably doable. But if you're gonna have the fire department go do a safety inspection, if you're gonna manage, a Saturday night complaint, someone's blocking my driveway, there's a party at this Airbnb, that will become time consuming really quickly. So there may be a baby step that's easy to do, but it's a pretty small step.
Well, I totally see your point, and I like the tracking only piece, but where would owner occupied fall in that
So it would,
as a requirement?
I would defer to this group. I mean, one thing would be, you might do a very simple form that says, we do want people who are owner occupied running an STR to sign up with the town and just tell us that they're doing it,
Mhm.
pay like some very nominal fee. Very, very small fee to just say, yep, I'm doing that. I make it available. Ask me again in a year, and you're basically, it's like, we could go ask Sarah how much time she spends on dog licenses.
Mhm.
And that would be, a not dissimilar sort of scenario to that. And then it might say, if this is on your property that you live on, you can stop right here on the form. If this is not on the property you live on, please complete the following. And you need to attest that, you only own one, and you need to, maybe there's a little more to it at that point.
Some towns charge like a lot more for non-owner occupied.
Yeah.
Ones than owner occupied ones.
Some towns just charge a very large fee.
Yeah.
So that's also another way to deter it, right? Because they're making, this is becoming money-making property, you're right? It's
Going right to the housing fund.
Yeah.
All right,
Right.
there you
You know,
And
and,
I, what Winesky does.
the one thing
They
I'll
charge
say
something
is,
like $5,000 a year,
go.
then
having
People
worked for
are too
bigger
much,
cities before, this would be literally the only business we require a town license for. So we have no local business licensing, basically in Vermont. I don't think anybody does this. I work for Missoula, Montana. It's like, the easiest way to gain zoning compliance was you say, oh, you're out of zoning compliance. The clerk's gonna yank your business license, and now you're really in trouble. And, it's not really a New England thing to do that.
We do that with liquor licenses.
We do it with a liquor license, so you can be banned from selling your alcohol or tobacco, et cetera. But that's one of the other things, and why there's sort of this baby step, and then there's like this other big step that's almost like, a Pandora's box sort of thing is, talking with the deputy fire chief, well, what about all the other rentals that are unsafe in
Well,
town?
yeah.
Or the de facto boarding homes that are being operated out of converted single family houses, which we're aware of, et cetera. And how do we, or should we be addressing more and more of that? So, if you talk to Tim Gary, he'll say, we ought to have a local rental inspection regime, period. And any kind of rental, short-term, long-term, ought to be getting an annual walkthrough by someone from the fire department. And ought to be meeting criteria, that a public building needs to meet, because not all of that's getting, caught right now. So just,
Matt,
Yeah.
isn't there at this point the state will have an inspector come in if there's a complaint. It's not automated, like they don't do it every year, but I think the state, like if there's a rental, I think it's short-term rental. If short-term rental, there's a complaint, I think the fire DPS will come in.
the fire marshal will respond to complaints, yes. For anything that qualifies as a quote unquote public building, that's not gonna include a single family home. And there are some ways you can rent out it, like if I just rent you a single family home to live in, it's still a single family home and it's not a public building. If I sort of convert it into a boarding house, and we've had that, that yes, the fire marshal will come out and respond to that. I don't know if they'll respond to a short-term rental in a single family home. They might. They probably would, just because if they get a safety
So-
complaint.
Not to go back, just not to repeat myself, but I mean, like the way to avoid the complaint thing. I mean, doesn't avoid it entirely because you can have an owner occupied home and the owner can be like totally fine with raves and then the neighbor cannot be, and that can still cause noise problems. But like, it's a lot less common. So like the homeowner living there has a built-in enforcement mechanism that does temper a lot of the problems that we've seen. And so again, just because we don't have very many and we're hopefully a little bit ahead of it, I think there is the choice of saying not at all. I think the problem with doing a registry and even just charging a massive fee for those who are not owner occupied and limiting the number that they can have is that it doesn't solve the complaint issues. And I bet you'll get them whether or not we say we enforce that, like whether or not there's anything in the ordinance at all that says anything about, because we still have noise ordinance. I mean, we still have other ordinances that people can violate, and you're still gonna get hit with those, even if there's nothing special about short-term rentals in there.
Yeah, I take your
And
question.
if Megan had wanted to, she could have, called the cops on the people who came into her home. I mean, like there's still like potential for drain on local resource that's real. So, I mean, that is the most radical option. I want to really acknowledge that, but like we could just say, pay us $10 and give us your name if you're renting out a room in your house as a short-term rental, and nothing else is allowed.
Yep. That's probably the very smallest version of this that you could put forward, and yeah,
And I don't know what do you do with the 3 that already exist?
you tell them it's not allowed anymore.
Or you give like I think South Burlington has some kind of waiver, I mean, not waiver, it's like, what do you call it?
Grandfather.
Installed until
It's,
2028 or something.
Yeah,
Being
2028,
enforced.
everybody has to come into compliance.
So they give them some time.
They give them some
basically.
time.
It's not like you gotta stop tomorrow, but
Smart.
Right.
somewhere beyond the horizon of the Airbnb reservation system, you gotta stop.
Right. You get a year. You get a year to figure out what you're doing next with your property.
Yeah,
It looks like there's, is till, waived until 2028 with certain conditions.
Chicken.
So I have a question and a proposal, and the question for staff is, what do we do? How do we regulate bed and breakfast in Williston?
so bed and breakfast is a defined land use as a commercial land use. It is specifically allowed, for example, in the ag rural zoning district. And it's encompassed by the suite of allowed land uses in the village and any of our other mixed use zones. I do not believe it's a defined allowed use in the residential zoning district. I don't think it is. I think the residential district still has the language that says, where's the use table? There isn't one because all that's allowed here is residential. So if you wanted to establish a B and B out in the ag rural district, you'd go through, I'm pretty sure it trips the threshold for a development review board review. You'd be doing some things to your site plan, et cetera,
So
to make that happen.
we don't monitor them in any way.
No, the state does though. The state does.
Okay, and the one that's in the village.
Right, Matt? I mean, you have to have a license. You can't operate a
Yeah.
B&B without a license.
Yeah, you've got an actual,
So it's a state licensure.
Right.
you've got a hospitality license, but for the bed and breakfast here in the village went through the development review process at the time. I think it might have been far enough in the past. It was with the planning commission to establish that property as a bed and breakfast.
Emily has comments.
Yeah, Emily.
I'm trying to pull up village bylaw, but I don't think there's anything in it that would preclude, a home in the village being converted to a short-term rental as a commercial use.
Okay.
Because
So bed and
I think
breakfast
the
in
one
addition,
near Megan, it might be associated with a neighboring business, is my understanding.
I don't think the land is actually touches.
Yeah,
I own the piece between them.
I was actually, Emily, I was talking about the one on Slate Barn Drive.
Right, which is is not an Airbnb, it's just
No,
a
that's a bed
B
and
and B.
Yeah.
breakfast, but
Right.
it's labeled as an inn.
Yeah, but I mean, there's,
Mhm.
in places where we allow commercial uses, you can have a great big hotel, you can have a little 4-bedroom bed and breakfast. You don't have to live there. You know, it's not a home business, it's a business, and it gets permitted, as such.
Okay, so it's a different animal. It includes serving of food. And it's state licensed.
Correct, so.
Okay.
So I don't think, we don't predicate our approval on a state license, but functionally, yes, but. If you were buying a house somewhere where bed and breakfasts were allowed and you were gonna turn it into a bed and breakfast, you'd go through site plan review. We'd be asking you about your parking and your access and where your dumpster was gonna be and. You know, any physical changes you're making to the building.
So we
and
treat it
all
as a
that.
business use, but we don't treat short-term rentals as a business use,
Correct.
even though they have exactly the same traffic kinds of.
Today, our zoning doesn't care if you rent a residential property to somebody for 24 days, 24 hours, or 24 years.
But we do care if you're serving bed and breakfast as you rent.
If you,
Even though it's functionally the same with the same number of cars.
Right.
Right, so when I look at the village, and thinking about Megan's area for a moment, to be, a major non-residential use, you would have to have frontage on Oak Hill Road, and the structure containing the use must be adjacent to or directly visible from that road. It's not achieved by a flag lot whereby only the driveway portion has frontage and the structure is set back from the road. So I would say that anything on Bradish Lane cannot be a major residential use. It would be a minor non-residential use. And prohibited outdoor activities include outdoor sales, dining, and gathering areas for customers. So I think it's pretty hard to run a short-term rental or an inn where you tell people they can't gather or be outside. If you have a commercial use on directly fronting on Oak Hill Road or Williston Road, you would be a major use and you could have those outdoor area provisions. But the intent of minor non-residential use is that it takes place within the structure. It's basically a amped up home business.
Okay, so my proposal, and I should say it's, I feel like it's important to do something now because you get into the problem that Burlington and South Burlington have with grandfathering and people suing you because you changed the rules after they invested money and so forth. So regardless of how small the issue is now, I feel like it's really good to address it. And the things from that association of short-term rental agencies said, decide what your goals are. I think that's the one that said, set your goal. What are your short-term rental goals? And I figured our goals are, I have 3. One is to mitigate the problems with SDRs, and the problems with SDRs is documented on pages 4 and 5 of the white paper. They're all the things we talked about. The second is to minimize regulation and the overhead that creates both for the owners and for our staff, town staff. And the third is to allow for owner occupied properties, so that we are not denying homeowners with 5 bedrooms or others at ADUs and so forth, the ability to rent out their things on a short-term basis. I was gonna say there should be a maximum of 2 per owner occupied, because someone might have a house and an ADU and the house might have multiple bedrooms and they now are aging and living alone and could potentially, I could see somebody having 2 on their property. But I don't know if that's what it, so to me, if those are the goals, then,
Also, shouldn't we have the other rear goal, which is we don't want the house availability to right out by this. would
Yes,
be-
that's one
isn't
of the listed,
underlying.
that's one of the listed, I didn't relist them, there's about 10 disadvantages of short-term rentals on. Could we pull up page 4 and 5 of, because to me, I'm predicated on that, of that.
Oh.
In the survey, the last link was to a white paper.
Okay, hold on, yeah.
It could be a disadvantage, but the whole purpose of us wanted to do though is we wanted to make sure that the house are available for people who want to live here permanently, right? That is the
One of the goals.
biggest, that.
It does
Well,
seem like that's what it really comes down to, because even the
Everything else
cases
is
with the
just surrounding,
community
right?
concerns really come, they go around that, cause it's like
Yeah.
someone who's more in the community is less likely to cause the kinds of disruptions that
And
we're
you can
talking about.
communicate with them, like if there is a noise issue or something like
Yes,
that. You
so
can communicate with the owner because
This-
you have a relationship with them.
this list, to me, I think we're trying to avoid all of those things. I don't know that one of them is the big thing and the others are small. To me, we want to avoid all of these problems. And there's one more on the next page. So to me, that's the whole.
That's the
list.
most important.
To me, we want to avoid all of those things. So to me, goal number 1 is avoid those problems. Goal number 2 is to avoid having to have a whole lot of regulation for the owners, whatever. And goal number 3 is to still allow owners to have an opportunity to rent part of their property on a short-term basis. I think we do need a registration in order to do that. And then compliance would only be dealt with on a complaint basis, and when the police get a noise complaint, they don't know if it's a short-term rental or not, they'd go to it. But one of the effects of having had repeated noise complaints could be that you lose your short-term rental ability. To me, you register not so that we're gonna inspect or do anything, but if there are complaints, then there's an action you can take, which is you can revoke what they registered for. So basically, all we need to determine, is it a short-term rental? That's by definition. The definition was in all our materials, it's.
Yeah.
The second is, has it been registered? It's a violation if it hasn't been registered. And the third is, does the owner live on the premises? And that has to be defined, because somebody might vacation for a month and still be a resident. And then you could have one more question, which is, are there more than 2 on the property? Because we might want to, I think, limit it to either 1 or 2. And so to me, the registration is then the only overhead other than complaint follow-up. But I would assume the complaint follow-up should be on the same basis of any complaint in the neighborhood. It's not a different follow-up than for any building, any house. If there's complaints about parking and it's all the owner and his family or her family.
Wait,
it's the same
Chapin, are
response.
you then saying, and you can't do it if you don't live there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why you were premonitioning. So to me, that means we are taking on the overhead of registering and in return having a registration fee that would help
Cover
with
the
that
overhead.
that
Yeah.
overhead. And that we would have some problems still, and it would require some follow-up and sometimes police and sometimes even us following up, at least to revoke or tell them they're out of compliance. But that should be less than what we would have to do to deal with the problems from non-owner occupied STRs. So that's my proposal.
And also, I mean, it's probably easier to start strict and loosen up than go the other direction, so that might be another reason to start with the only owner occupied.
Chapin, are you saying that someone who owns a home, like if they were to rent their home because they left to go live somewhere else part of the year, that would still apply under that because it's still owner occupied even if they're not present? Or do they have to be physically on site living
To
and,
me, they have to be a resident of that property, and the part that they rent out is not the part they live in. Because if they rent out the part they're living in, by definition, they're not there when it's being
I think,
inhabited. But you could rent your house out if you go on vacation, you can do that as a longer term rental.
well, even like, I do think there could be like, you have to be a resident 8 months a year, 9 months, like
Yeah.
put some cap on
We
it,
have to
because you
define
think
it.
about like someone who's maybe a snowbird and they leave for 2 months of the year, that's technically, even if they rent it for the whole time, that's actually technically, depending on your definition, still a short-term rental. And we'd probably want to allow that. It's totally reasonable.
Yeah,
It could be, it could be your
That is-
primary residence. We could require it be your primary resident.
Yes, we could say primary residence.
No snowbird is dumb enough to have Vermont be their primary.
right,
residence.
that's what I was just thinking that, but there are people, you know, in our
For tax
neighborhood.
purposes.
And we could also register, like, have that in the registration form, like, do you, like, if you're not going to be here, who's your point of contact, like, who's
Good point, yeah.
responsible for your property if you.
I mean, you may wanna think about this, cause the whole house outright ban is really easy. Are you, I mean, when I lived on Cape Cod before Airbnb existed, all of us who needed cheap housing looked for winter rentals. Because people would rent their summer place out for, 8 months for often not too much money.
I did that on Nantucket one winter.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you would go find housing that way. So, you may have people who say, well, I go to Florida for 6 months, it's way more convenient for me to just run this as an Airbnb and I don't have to worry about, evicting anybody and I don't have to worry about, all those things, which is one of the reasons people go to short term. But it is, administratively a lot harder once we say, well, where do you really live? How long are you really gone for? Et cetera.
Isn't there an official primary residence definition though? or-
Residence is physical presence plus intent to remain. That's the legal standard. And what you will do for Florida for tax purposes, it's 6 months and a day. So you need to show that you're physically in the place for more than half the year. So when we talk to people who, we have a lot of people in Williston who, their Williston tax bill goes to somewhere in Florida. It's actually quite common. And I don't think any of those houses pop up as short-term rentals right now. They may just.
I like the idea of allowing them to have the income, but it's the same problem. If they're in Florida and they're Airbnb-ing it doesn't solve our issue of complaints. It does change the fact that, like, they're still real, like they're real parts of the community for half the year. So it does solve that, but.
And it would hit them in the pocketbook if they don't comply. I mean, they'll lose their ability to do it. We would pull their registration if you know what I mean.
And then what? And they're just like, well.
I think it's gonna be the same thing as the dog tags. People just won't register because they've been doing it, and then they don't want to deal with this, and we're not gonna be able to regulate it that well, so they're just gonna be doing what they've been doing.
Well, and to my feeling is if they're doing it, and nobody knows it, and there's no complaints, then what are we?
Right.
It seems like to me the thing we're trying to avoid is all that list of problems. And the well, so the definition of resident has to be worked out for sure. But I think if we deny people who live in Williston and want to rent out their ADU on a short-term basis or part of their house on a short-term basis, I feel as though we are not meeting all of our goals. Which is we want people to be able to remain. We want people to be able to afford to live here.
Yeah, I think honestly that part is easy to manage, easy to handle through essentially maintaining a list. Still easy to revoke a license if somebody, isn't responsive to dealing with an issue. I do think there's a little bit of soft enforcement from, the big STR companies where if they basically find out that you're in trouble with the town you're in, they may delist you as well. There are some ways to handle that, but, I think that, well, I don't wanna jump ahead too far, but I'm aware of the time. What we've been kind of thinking about is we wanna get the temperature of the planning commission, and we wanna float this idea through, the select board and say, this is something we've been talking about, here's why we've been talking about it, here's roughly what we think would be manageable for the town, get some time in front of them. And so the feedback I'm hearing is, the real focus for ban or really limit is the entire home where the person operating the STR doesn't live there. However you want to define that, and we might have to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, but I don't say it has to be a whole home. To me, if it's not a business, so it's not a hotel or whatever, then I don't care whether it's whole homes or single room apartments. If they're rented on a nightly basis, it's a different thing than, you know what I mean?
Well, I'm talking about the threshold being, does the owner live on the property?
Yes, okay, but the owner could live on a property and have, yeah, okay.
And I think if you
Matt.
limit it to, you're avoiding the bootleg bed and breakfast situation. Yeah,
So your thought is to go and float the concept to the select board? Not
Yeah.
an actual proposal.
I think what we could do, I mean, we could rough in the ordinance language just to show that we've that's always a good exercise for just thinking through it, is to actually write it up like an ordinance. We could show that back to you folks and then say, we'd like to transmit this to the select board. Because this is an ordinance, not zoning, it's a less formal process. It's the planning commission saying, hey, we've been thinking about some land use and housing issues that are best served and are typically served through the adoption of an ordinance. We've directed staff to work on one that we're comfortable with. Here's what it looks like. Here's the one-page summary of what it would do. We'd like some feedback. We'd like to see what the willingness would be on the part of the select board to adopt something like this. Get the feedback from the select board, probably do a little bit more work here, and then bring something forward that they're interested in moving on. And I think everything we talk about here tonight, you would hear them talk about there as well.
And I would encourage sharing with them the white paper and maybe not the VSTRS, whatever that organization is, as much.
Yeah.
The VSTRS gets down into the weeds of what you would do if you're trying to regulate all of them. And if we want to say, no, we actually only want to regulate owner occupied, a whole bunch of that goes away. And it's addressed very well, I thought, in that white paper, because they have a 3-column thing where it says, for this, to regulate this, here's ways not to do it, here's ways to do it. And so to me, it's very constructive.
I like the idea of having something drafted just so that it's a little bit more concrete and being clear that we are flexible in some of it, but just like, I think I think that would be great.
And I'm pushed a little bit by seeing Essex Junction struggle with trying to register all rental properties and the blowback they got.
Like do it sooner before that more of them exist, is what you're
Well, I
saying?
want to do it soon for the Airbnb, for the short-term rentals, but I don't want to try to get into registering all rental properties and all that. There may be work to do there in the future, but let's deal with the short term, because the short-term rental is a whole different issue. And when Essex Junction, as an example, tried to combine the two and have a registry for both and inspections for both and stuff, they got so much blowback from rental people that the whole thing got put on hold for a while. And I would just like to see us deal with short-term rentals alone, even though we may want at some point to do something about other rentals.
Sure, okay. Did we have more of the survey results to go through or
No,
anything more than, okay.
Thank you, guys.
So look at that, it really did take an hour.
It's a hot topic.
Yeah.
okay, so let me share.
Thank you, Melinda,
Um,
and the intern.
there we go. Okay. Oh.
Okay, yes. We remember. Should.
Chapin brought me some comments that seem to be mostly minor in nature. And then I do have one proposal for this, version that would be warned for public hearing. So the main change that I'm gonna be making, or recommending to the village chapter is for the demolition standards. In one of the meetings with the public that I had. The two of the standards are redundant. And there's one demolition standard about, where the proposal, to demolish the structure would be doing something that's in the comprehensive plan, and I'm totally not explaining that well, let me pull it up. So demolition.
You wanna share?
Yep, I am having Adobe
Um,
slowdown issues. So, there we go. So the standards for demolition of a contributing structure, number 3, in conjunction with a plan for redevelopment, the structure is determined to be a deterrent to an improvement, that it would be a clear and substantial benefit to the community in accordance with the comprehensive plan. And that the structure cannot be incorporated into the improvement for the redevelopment of the site, so. Our town plan is in great flux right now as we revise it. The standard under the current and proposed town plan would be very tricky, I think, for staff and the DRB to administer. And then bullets number 1 and 2 are kind of saying the same thing, but one's referring to chapter 18, our nuisance chapter. So the proposal would basically be to combine bullets 1 and 2, eliminate number 3. And that demolition is only allowed for a contributing structure where it's deteriorated such that repairs and restoration are not possible without undue financial hardship.
It makes sense to me, those first 2 bullets could be combined. I'm a little bit missing the 3rd bullet point because it's sort of, the 3rd bullet to me is about a greater good. Right, that you might override with specifics because there's a greater good to the project. And where does that wind up in what you said?
So what that could mean is theoretically under that proposal, a historic property could be torn down, even if it's in really good condition. For example,
I see.
the town could say, we're gonna tear down the old brick church and build housing, or
Our Dunkin' Donuts is going in.
Dunkin' Donuts, it's gonna go there.
Our drive-through.
Sure.
Or I'm trying to think of a non-municipal, because we do have our 4413, but. Take a really cute house that's historic in the historic district that you like.
someone could say, we're gonna tear down what the orthodontist office and we're gonna be building affordable housing. And that would potentially be a clear and substantial
Yeah.
benefit to the community. But it would be taking away a historic structure where you could adaptively reuse it into housing. Our bylaw is very permissive of additions to that kind of structure where you could do commercial uses or housing in it. I think for the
Yes.
DRB to be able to make that finding as this is proposed, is creating a lot of sticky
So
conflict.
it's that phrase that, and that structure cannot be incorporated into an improvement is a lot of judgment.
Yeah,
Okay. So you're just saying, don't include that,
yeah,
just the first two bullets. which
Yeah.
are not combined. Okay.
combining those first two bullets.
Sounds good.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
There was one other change, in the access chapter where,
Yes.
yes, I haven't made the change yet, but you already have said that, have amended it to say that driveways in the village can have up to 9
Yeah,
dwellings on
Not 10?
private drive. And then,
uh,
and we're proposing that that be the case in the RZB as well. 9 dwelling units on a shared driveway.
yeah, so 13.513 would create an exception for properties in the village and residential zoning district. Up to 9.
Is there some sort of like logic behind 9? Is it because you could have, like, in terms of, I don't know, acres or number of buildings or other kinds of factors, or like, where did that number come from? I'm not
Yeah.
disputing the number, I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
like, what is behind it?
I know that for most of this, the 9 to 10 unit threshold for Act 250 is a moot point. Our inclusionary zoning standards, there's an inflection point between 9 and 10 units with that payment in lieu. Single digits feel nicer than double digits when you're thinking about how many units are served off of one
Yeah.
point of access.
Mhm.
So it's somewhat arbitrary, somewhat tied to the chapter 11 payment in lieu inclusionary threshold.
Mhm.
Would that capture like an apartment building that wanted to do 9 units?
Yeah.
Or like 10, okay.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about internally is that this is a limit on units, not, structures or buildings or some of the other things that we're seeing come down through the law. Where, areas served by water and sewer, a lot that can have a single family home on it must be allowed to have a single family or a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
some of it is keying into the fact that, there are denser development patterns that are now allowed. And the jump from a driveway, which, when you can require 14 to 16 feet of width is a pretty substantial
Mhm.
driveway. The jump from that to a street, there is no sort of like primitive street or small street or
Mhm.
anything like that. Private streets in Williston are required to be built to the public street specification. It's 64 feet of right of way. It's 26 feet of pavement. It's a much, much more substantial requirement, and it seems like a real deterrent to some of the infill and especially multifamily infill opportunities that places like the Village and even some of the smaller lots in the RZD present. And at the end of the day, 9 units is, whether it's 2 fourplexes in a single or, some other combination is still a relatively small project. And I think there's enough in the town's access chapter to still make sure you're requiring adequate turnaround space, access for emergency services, driveway clearance, et cetera, where you can manage for all of those things. And nine homes in a multifamily configuration on a driveway is 7 or 6.5 cars going in or out of that driveway during the busiest hour of the day and the evening. It's about 3/4 of a trip per unit in a multifamily. That's a car every 8 minutes or something. That's pretty manageable.
And I don't know if this will happen, but in the development pattern that some places have with alleys running behind so that your access to parking into your buildings is from behind the pedestrian frontage. It would be nice if you can. I could see, my first picture of this is a single driveway going back. But it could be a driveway that goes back and then serves more than one property from the backside, giving them better nicer front yards, nicer frontage.
The other thing that this helps us with, we've had a few development proposals where we had a home near the village on a relatively large lot. 2 duplexes proposed, 4 driveways, all with curb cuts to Route 2 proposed. And, we kind of felt back.
I remember that, yeah.
V-Trans will never allow that, thankfully.
Right.
But I think if there was any nervousness about the greater number of units, we could also buffer it with more stringent language about requiring shared access. But I think as a staff, we've gotten more comfortable really pushing that shared access, and the DRB's gotten really comfortable requiring it and not really listening to the protestations of the applicant who's like, no, I've got to be able to sell one house, and it's America, it's got to have its own drive, that sort of, that it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
People don't want to share. When you get all those
Quote you
curb
on
cuts,
that.
it has safety and it has impacts on pedestrian usability along the road and lots of other things. It's a more impervious surface, et cetera. So in our conversations, like in light of those density provisions that we're now dealing with, in light of the encouragement of multifamily, in light of 9 is still not quite the smallest, but it's a smaller project in terms of pay in lieu growth management and inclusionary zoning. That seemed like the right number.
Great.
So if with the other proposed change, this would be for the residential district too, and so it would not be specific to the village zoning district. Is that what you were saying, Melinda?
Yeah, that's what we're proposing.
Yeah, I would say village zoning district and residential zoning district.
Okay.
And I think we could even specify 5 primary dwellings, because our administration of this, because accessory dwellings are accessory to a primary, theoretically, you can have 5 homes on a shared private driveway, each single family, and each of those 5 homes has an ADU, which is 10 dwellings, primary and accessory combined.
Right, so when you use the word dwelling, you capture that.
In that scenario, if that's like the hypothetical of 5 homes get built and then 4 of them put in their ADUs and the 5th one's like, my turn, I want the ADU, do we say like is the driveway then the limiting factor there? Like, is that functionally what happens?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that different from if somebody has a big lot on the end of a shared driveway today, wants to subdivide, but it would create the 6th unit. Say, unless you can convince your neighbors to turn your driveway into a street, the answer is no, and it's just a natural limitation.
Yeah, so residential zoning district and village zoning district may serve up to 9 primary dwelling units. And the 14 to 16 feet is our shared private driveway standard allows for 12 to 16 feet. The fire department's typical preference is 14 feet, and that's typically what people provide as well.
Let's make sure a fire truck can get up the driveway.
Then we'll need to go to our street specification and probably get a public cul-de-sac specification in as well.
But we do have standards in the access chapter limiting grade and providing the ability to require pull-offs and things like that.
200 feet.
So if you get a really long drive, we can do that, and you can't build a super steep driveway under this standard.
But we're
although it's
not
still pretty steep.
really likely to see that in the residential zoning district.
No.
No,
No.
and village zoning district in particular.
Yep.
It's gonna be relatively short.
Yeah.
One of the other only changes that we made. Is stormwater systems. So because the state of Vermont changed the stormwater permitting requirements to the 3 acre rule. We're gonna be seeing a lot more applications coming through the door where. Developments are upgrading their stormwater systems or building new stormwater systems. In terms of our zoning, our bylaw doesn't have any say or influence over these types of things. They have to meet the state standards, so our proposal is to make that an exception to the clearing limit, so. It would be an administrative permit instead of a discretionary permit. Right now, any clearing or grading over 1/4 acre automatically goes to the Development Review Board. This would be a special carve out for those state stormwater system permits.
Yeah, so we're just seeing some waves of those where we go. I guess we have to bring this to the DRB, have a whole public hearing process. When there are retrofits into existing developments, there's often physically, like literally one place where the thing can go. There's not a lot of discretion to exercise over them. And just, it's a common theme in Williston's bylaw that, the threshold to send something to the DRB is often quite low. And, you know, we've seen that with other types of projects where even the DRB starts reflecting back to us. It's like this kind of project, we see it over and over again, we approve it, we never modify it. Couldn't you guys just have a standard for this and not do this in the meeting? So,
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing there.
Yeah. So. I had the village bylaw open house last Wednesday. The turnout was quite low, I think in part because there were like flash flood warnings and it was raining like crazy. But there were a couple good conversations, a lot of things not related to our upcoming bylaw amendment, but good discussion overall. If a public hearing is scheduled for January, depending on my capacity, I might try to do another one either the week before your public hearing or between your public hearing and the select board public hearing. That's probably more likely in like February or March, just to give people another opportunity to have an informational session. I've had a lot of really good one-on-one meetings and email correspondence with people, where it seems like there's a lot of support, for what's going on.
Thank you for doing that.
Great, yeah, thank you.
In terms of your public hearing, there's a couple options. We can do it here at your regular meeting time on the 21st. We have no idea how many people might show up to a public hearing. There could be none. There could be several, and this room can get kind of cramped, so we can configure this space to make additional seating. But if you wanted to move your meeting to Wednesday, we could do it at the library or town hall. Or on Thursday at town hall. I do know Wednesday we would need to do some staff logistics because Melinda would be at conservation, or excuse me, energy committee, and we would have to have someone staffing that front door. So what folks' preferences are, we can probably make this room work on the 21st, but just want to give you guys options.
I guess my sense would be that this is kind of the sweep of the, like it's the last of many opportunities for people to come and weigh in, right? And so it's, my sense would be that accommodating it here would be fine on the Tuesday, but that's just kind of a gut feeling.
And I mean, you know, not to be lost in this, we are looking for consensus from the group that we should go ahead and move forward and warn a public hearing on this. And then, you know, I think there's been a lot of really terrific work done by the staff on this project. And we are running into the sort of the silly season, the half of the year where the select board deals with budget and then town meeting and then reconfiguring and everything else. But we think you could get your hearing done early this winter. it might not show up at the select board until close to the end of the 120-day deadline in, May or June. Hey, we've got a town plan to write too. But if you tell us to go ahead and warn it and give us some direction on preference from the meeting, we'll let you know what night we can put it on for and all of that. So.
And there is a motion at the top of the page.
I'll make the motion. I should limit to move that the Williston Planning Commission scheduled 2 public hearings to amend the Williston Unified Development Bylaw for the V Home Act Amendment Package and the Village Zoning District Amendment Package. Or
Oh, because there was 2 separate.
Yeah, 2 separate facts.
I'm the one who said to do that.
All good.
And
it's one date, the 2 public hearings are on one date for 2 different bylaws, and the date is, sorry,
January 21st.
January
first
2025.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, great.
And if that doesn't work, option 3 looks better than option 2. because
Okay,
Mhm. All right,
so Shayla made the motion.
I'll second.
Chapin second.
All in favor?
Yay.
That's everyone.
All right.
And thank you to staff,
Yeah,
Amazing
good.
work.
really appreciate it.
Melinda on the Home Act and Emily on the Village.
Yep. So all
And everybody
them.
else who participated.
So we have to have the package ready by the 7th, is that right?
So working backwards, if the hearing's on the 21st, it needs to be noticed by the 6th.
Okay.
Which means in the paper on January 2nd, which means sending it to the Observer on December 27th, which is the week Matt is not here. Like tomorrow, we should be, but this week we'll probably try to be buttoning it up and.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the Observer notice, if we send it to them on the 27th, we just need to have it online on the website by by January 2nd.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we should be
you can do
good.
it.
Good to know.
Okay.
But good question, like, especially with travel and holidays and all that stuff, it's good to test out if all that's gonna work. So,
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nope, we can do it. They don't need me for any of this anyway. All right. Cool,
Great.
thank you.
So did you want to move on to the capital budget next, or did you want to do the grand list?
Let's, the more critical item is the capital budget comment memo, and I can just sort of intro this. Melinda did a bunch of work on the draft memo. I emailed everybody before our meeting at the library 2 weeks ago, the PDF of the capital budget. What's here is the link of the one that's been, published on the town's website. I think it's essentially exactly the same. We made a review at the staff level of the capital budget and started this draft memo because we need some direction on it soon, and I really need to hand a draft of this, or I need to hand a memo to Eric, I believe ahead of the January 7th meeting, so we don't have a lot of time. We can basically discuss as a group, if the group would like to appoint a couple of members to work with staff to polish it up. And authorize them to move it on to the select board, that would be great. But, with apologies, we were in a crunch once again, just in terms of the amount of time it took to get this thing out and developed.
I thought you did a great job of reading our minds.
Yeah.
Well, we worked extensively off of the old memo, and, Melinda's got another year in the energy planner position under her belt. So being able to really go in and target, there's a lot of structural differences in this capital budget and a lot more homes for energy goals to be achieved. But there's not a lot of dollars attached to any of those goals, and that's, what we saw was
Pretty much $0 attached to those goals.
Yeah. I mean, I said not a lot, but
There were a lot
you're right.
a lot of promises and good intent and no action. like promises of maybe a pickup truck in FY 27. I nominate Steve to work on the wording.
Since he's
No,
not
it's
here.
I just thought you did a really good job of making a first and second draft. It's almost ready for polishing.
Yeah, I mean, the things happily. Also, we've been yabbering at you guys about this for a while. So hopefully that was helpful when you had to do it in short notice. But I guess the things for me that I really appreciated were the affordable housing piece in there and the pedestrian infrastructure. Do we need, is the community center stuff? I guess it's fine. I'm a little worried about the community center, but we have to dwell on it.
The plan did lay out a vision for the community center, I thought.
The capital budget.
Yeah, the capital budget, I thought it did a good job putting it into its current context.
And there's money there.
Yeah.
Something we talked about probably a couple months ago at this point is with the vehicle fleets, including mention of like considering if partnering with Car Share Vermont for any like light duty, more like passenger, like smaller EVs is appropriate. So
And sharing a vehicle with car share.
Yeah.
So that we share the cost and the use.
and
Oh,
also,
yeah, that's what Shelburne did, right?
yeah, that's what Shelburne did.
Yeah.
And so it seems like in this section here, that could get given, I don't know if it needs a full bullet point or anything, but just given a nod
I
to,
think it does need a bullet because it's it's a way to save a lot of the capital cost and still. Yeah,
Be able to like pilot a vehicle. Be able to have-
give us experience with
Yeah.
it. Yes, and the last year they bought a vehicle for transporting the stormwater coordinator. And they said that the state hadn't approved any hybrids or anything, so they had to buy whatever. And do they need a vehicle full-time or could it be a car share vehicle?
The other thing, I think it's mentioned in here, it's definitely something I've talked with Eric Wells about is. There are communities that are having success accessing alternative fuel vehicles by using a request for proposals process rather than buying through the state contract, so.
Or even leasing.
Yeah, so I believe. If it's not written down in here, Eric and I have definitely talked about. Saying like, rather than continuing to run against this sort of brick wall where you go, well, there's just not the kind of vehicle we need in the state contract. You put out an RFP and say, we need a vehicle that can do the following, or we even want this model. And you send it to the dealerships.
Eric did mention that in the.
Okay, it
his
is
memo.
in his memo, okay.
Yeah.
So, there is, I think. Not a lot of money. I mean, you're sitting with 3 town employees who are gonna switch insurance providers yet again this year. As happened 3 years ago, because,
Every year it's happened.
the plan changes every year. We've gone from Blue Cross to MVP to Blue Cross back to MVP this year. It saves the town about $185,000 this year to do that and provide a similar level of service. But. Eric, we are finding pennies in the couch cushions, in this budget.
The issue I have about not moving ahead with battery electric, at least light duty vehicles, is that if you look at the total cost of ownership. And there are municipal credits, that's not only private people can get credits for going green. When you look at the total cost of ownership, there's some adaptations to how to use it and charge it and so forth, but if you look at total cost of ownership, the repair record and the repairs that are needed and the cost of the fuel, you actually wind up often on the plus side after
Yeah.
8 to 9 years.
Right.
So we are short-sighted financially as well as environmentally if we say, oh, it's cost too much. Well, okay, you spend 10,000 more upfront and you save $3,000 a year on fuel and you save another 3,000 a year on maintenance.
Well, that would be another argument for maybe leasing
Mhm.
too, because then they wouldn't have.
Especially when the market is totally different, if we,
There's no exhaust system maintained, no ignition system maintained, no
Yeah.
oil changes,
Yeah,
no,
really never
a
thought
whole
like
bunch of
that.
stuff. And
Yeah, I hear all that and I agree with it, but if we're looking at like a really tight budget, like there's not. It's not gonna get prioritized to buy a new car, and I just think if we include like a bullet point on car share, it's like, okay, we're considering alternatives, like even if it's not gonna get prioritized now, it's like. We can be creative, like let's consider like all of the options.
I think I really want to add that bullet, and what I'm saying is, I hope we can get the people who are the bean counters to be looking at the total cost of ownership, because we are being penny wise and pound foolish to say we can't spend 10,000 more upfront for a vehicle that was gonna cost us X thousand less in the long run.
So do you want some volunteers to help, or what's the next step?
Well, you talked about a couple small things. Were there any other broad brush comments anybody had, where they wanted to see more work? Because I mean, if it was just to have Chapin propose some language around that particular point, I think we could handle that. And if this group is comfortable with what that's gonna say, we can just circulate it, ask for one more round of comments and then move it on. I will say one other thing while we're scrolling through, which is just that something that I am seeing in the town and I think is laudable, but is the beginning of a long journey, is building the staff level capacity to be able to do some of that long-term and careful planning. And you know, the HR position that was in last year's budget that was taken out of the budget that ultimately passed is one of those capacity building positions. The amount of sort of manual labor that goes into human resources, payroll, and accounts payable, receivable, and the nuts and bolts of running the town just continues to, you know, you have folks working here who have really great talents when it comes to thinking about long-term fiscal planning, who are, you know, people whose office lights are on next door when I'm going home and I'm going home late. And people who are sending me emails on Sunday afternoons, who are here doing that work.
Matt.
Well,
That was a special
that was a special circumstance. That was about the town plan. But I only work on stuff I want to on the weekends. But really, truly, continuing to understand the ways in which all of the administrative capacity of the town plays into its ability to take things on. We know all too painfully that grant money is like the least free money in the world. And sometimes usually you get to some point in that grant funded project where you go, why did we even do all this? The administrative burden is so great. And, that said, investing in people is really underpins a lot of this. So it's, and I'm not even asking for any more planners in the office. I just, it's just the town as a whole. So, we can circulate.
I don't know if there's a way you guys I really like it. It hits all the things that I'm frustrated with. So thank you. I just, is there like somewhere in here where we want to, I don't know, just like bold the fact that there are things in the town plan that have just seen no funding, even though I really like the bulleted list of all the steps that you have all taken, without money, to achieve these town goals. But I think just somehow reinforcing this point that like, this is what people have told us they want. We are trying to do it and we cannot go any further without funding. And you say it very nicely, Melinda, a number of times. Just wondering if you want to be like more like direct about it.
I mean, like, I literally took your words from last year, so it was really like you said it very well. Someone, you know, whoever really, yeah, so we have
Yeah, we don't
noted
have to
previous
change it right
years'
now. Just
goals.
like that's like the
Usually-
constantly sort of fighting that fight is of course getting tiresome. And then you just have an extra bullet under pedestrian infrastructure. Very minor.
Yeah. Maybe I'll bold this.
I wanted to make, yeah. Right, 2 points about it. One is that our administrative structure is set up for departments for existing things. We don't have a Department of Energy. We don't have a Department of, sidewalks are under Public Works. But if you look at what Public Works does for sewer and roads, and they have huge responsibility for buildings, grounds, sewers and roads. And so how much of their responsibility goes to pedestrian infrastructure? And so I just feel like we're set up to where the people who are making proposals for the budget are the people who are perpetuating the current spending channels. And so it's really hard to break. It really is, I think, up to the town manager and the select board to insist on new channels of funding, on new thinking. Because it's really hard to get somebody who's responsible for a whole police force to say, oh, and I'm gonna make sure we do this for our energy part when their day is preoccupied with other things.
Here's something that, well, it was suggested by a member of the Energy Committee under general recommendations. And it is when considering future upgrades or purchases where there are opportunities for electrification. Department heads should do a life cycle cost analysis that compares conventional and electric options for the equipment being replaced. Such analysis should include all available rebates and tax credits as well as the social carbon costs.
That's
At $100.
here.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I wish that could say must, going forward that they must, because we're not gonna get off of this track of funding the stuff that we've been doing.
Yeah.
And that's, granted, it's more work.
I mean, I think that is policy in some municipalities.
I think Eric and the select board could impose it as policy on department heads.
Do we have historical data about like funding? Is there a kind of like long-term report that ever gets created town-wide for funding for different departments over time, like say a 10 or 20-year span?
I don't know that that's ever been put together. I mean, you can pile up all the capital budgets and certainly extract that history from it. So, it would be interesting. I mean, it's something we could take on. I mean, I find myself, I want to talk to you about the grand list tonight, doing more of these sort of like, what have we been up to and what does that really look like? So if we thought about what kind of questions we might want to answer in term, like what's happening with facilities versus vehicles versus, new things versus capital funding to maintain old things that, or we could do it by department. We could do it a couple of ways.
I'm looking at it right now, have come across an article by a criminologist who looked at the budgets of a whole bunch of small cities from 1991 to 2019 and found that the police budget was going up, whereas kind of like generally called social services or more of the the kind of routine kinds of things were still rising, but not nearly as quickly. And so it just, it just makes me wonder, like, how are these, if we don't have a bigger sense of trends in, like, across all kinds of spending for the town. I think one of our frustrations with the capital budget process has been, that we're so kind of late in the game. And there are all kinds of reasons why that happens, and they're totally understandable, but I think the other thing that really holds me back is not having a sense of, like, okay, I can look at the different budget line items, but I have no idea if that's a new expenditure or if that's just continuing a trend, or if this is a big spike from previous years. It just seems like a longer term kind of point of reference would be really helpful. And I don't think it needs to be, I mean, it's too late to do it for this year, but it's more like something to think about for maybe next year. And I think that would also really be important for the town residents to see, because they too would then have a sense of, like, oh, wow, spending has gone really, flat in this area. Even though we always say we want X, Y, and Z, the funding is just really flat. Or maybe they see like, hey, we said we wanted this, and sure enough, they spend money on it. It just seems like there's not a lot of kind of previous points of reference to kind of
How's your interns workload looking?
It's gone, semester's over.
Because it'd be really
She's my
nice.
TA for the
It would be
spring.
really nice.
Oh, good for you.
It'd be really nice to do that analysis in equalized dollars, so in two
Yeah,
thousand
you
twenty-four
can
dollars.
get the inflation adjuster thing going,
And we
yeah.
do have to be careful that our departments have been reorganized, and cemeteries be under here one time and then it's changed, and
Right.
there's been some significant realignment of what budgets we're under. Parks and Rec. No, never mind.
There's some things that move
Yeah.
around, but
Yeah.
I think
But I think
the point's a really good one, which is you don't really know where you are or what trend line or continuum you're on sometimes. And, there are departments where, like for, the public works director, so many more lane miles of new road means it's time to put another person on the plowing shift and purchase a vehicle for them to drive. And it's basically predicated on, that a person working 1 8-hour shift plows their route twice. And it's just literally mileage, basically. So understanding how those things work on the cost side over time, I was thinking about the story of the second sidewalk plow and how that was such a fundamental change, right? And a good story because it added all this operational capacity. But for years and years, we had one sidewalk plow and we were budgeting to replace it. And then we doubled the number of sidewalk plows. And so you see this, and I think there are a lot of other stories like that about capital expenditures.
And right now it's good we have two because one was down.
Yeah, the sidewalk plow number one is pretty near end of life anyway, and so now the plan is budgeting to replace it, but.
I watched on local access TV that long day of budget hearings, including you. And in watching the fire department, fire and EMS, and talking about the I think it's all the apparatus that each individual has. They have two of them, each person has two of them, and the life of that apparatus, and it's cost many thousands of dollars, is 10 years. So they use one for 5 years and then that becomes their backup. And the older ones are still perfectly usable, so they ship them to other countries that don't have as good standards as we do and can use them.
Yeah.
And so I think we just accept that everybody has to have two, and that they, after 5 years, it becomes their backup, and after 5 years, we give it away. And these are thousands and thousands of dollars, and I don't know, how do you balance safety with money? But we certainly don't look at paths that way, that, oh, it has a crack in it, or we don't have a path there, so we're gonna spend thousands of dollars on it. It is quite, it's quite shocking to watch those different presentations and the assumptions that are under the people who are presenting it and just say, of course, we do this, we do that, you know.
Yep.
And we have a blow up bag to lift heavy equipment that's stronger than the ones the state police have, so they call us in to help them with lifting heavy equipment. Yeah, you know, it's like, well, good, I'm glad we have what we need, but apparently we're so far ahead that have other agencies wanting to borrow our equipment.
Yep.
Except for
Including the state
EVs.
police.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah.
Except for EVs, yeah.
Except for EVs.
Except for what?
EVs.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
anyway, just a thought to maybe next year, by next year at this time, we can do this exercise with a little bit more familiarity with kind of past trends and, you know, also, I mean, you know, we've had a couple years of, I know that we're scraping for pennies in the couch cushions, but at the same time, with the ARPA money and things like that, we've actually had a bit of a cushion with some pieces of the puzzle, and that's gone, so we're going, so. So that's, you know, again, just something to consider in the kind of the bigger picture financial flow.
Yeah.
I do think also that the way that Eric restructured the budget this year, at least for me, it made a big difference in how you could read it and interpret it. And it's not, doesn't make it perfect, but at least if we get that type of document, it is easier to understand. I think the thing that Chapin said, Megan, is what I am a little flummoxed by in terms of addressing exactly what you're saying, which has been kind of my issue for a long time, is like, how do we get ahead of it and break up some of these cycles to address the new needs? And I think that's just going to be a long-term project, like keep the focus on that. I have a recurring calendar reminder to remind our amazing staff to please help us get involved in the process early. But I think trying to think about how we get really specific and concrete next year, because we didn't do that this year, of like, our ask this year is this. You know, what, like, let's prioritize it, sort of how we're doing in the town plan, so that we can go to a department head and say, we want you to budget X amount. And then go and actually individually talk to the select board members about it and sort of do a little bit more campaign style work to get some of our priorities done, because I think it's not going to happen otherwise.
Yeah, and I also, you know, talk a lot about the upcoming town plan in terms of hard conversations, and I think some of them are, here are some actions this plan includes, like spend money, allocate money to achieving this goal. And, you know, sort of going in a really frank way with the select board early in the town plan drafting process and saying, so this has not traditionally been funded. If you have this action in here, yeah, it's not the same as voting on your budget, but it really represents a commitment. And there may be some conversations where the select board said, we're not comfortable approving a town plan that has that action in it. We don't want to commit to that. I think the town plan is a great framework in which to have those conversations. So we're very mindful of that as we're working through the strategies and actions in the plan chapters right now as well.
I'm preaching to the choir, but Bert Moffat, our town manager of old, used to say every budget has to have a philosophy, and what he meant was you have to have goals. And you defend it based on the goals. And if we want a more livable, walkable, blah, 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 if those are some of our goals, that's part of our philosophy, that's our approach. And so we put money behind that, and we have to be willing to speak to the goals. Take some leadership. And I contend that if we had put a solar canopy on our parking lot, it would have some pizzazz, and there's a bunch of people. I certainly would have written letters of support to the editor. And I think there's a chance that we could have gotten more people to vote for it Because the solar canopy would pay for itself in however many number of years, probably not for 15. And then be a moneymaker, you know, in other words, you're investing in the future of your town and you have this. I feel like we are so afraid of having budgets shot down that we don't make them sexy. We just say they're maintenance. We just have to get a fire suppression system or put in a drainage in our parking lot. You know, that's hard for people to get behind just maintenance.
Mhm.
All right. So do we have time for the grand
I'm
list history
gonna talk,
presentation?
I can do it. I'm gonna blow through this and then you're gonna ask me some questions and, we're gonna do it. But I
I'm
wanted,
gonna apologize in advance. I'm probably gonna skip out on you.
That's-
With apologies.
that's.
I have read your presentation.
Totally understand. And if you have questions, email me. So what I wanted to do, actually, is, Megan, you mentioned the importance of like inflation adjusting things. I'm mostly gonna talk about the town's grand list and how we get revenue from that tonight, but I wanted to show you all this thing that I made just this afternoon, because I was looking at the other place we get revenue, which is the sales tax. And we always compare ourselves to our neighboring communities with our retail sales. So we're the gray bar on the top here. We still have the single, you know, the municipality with the single highest level of taxable retail sales of any of them. But this is what happens when you inflation adjust those numbers to $2024. So if you're wondering where Amazon shows up in the numbers, there it is, and what you have to do is inflation adjust, and then you'll see it.
Yep.
In 2024 dollars, there was a lot more retail activity going on in 2005 than there is in 2020. Sorry, the 2022 is a misnomer on that. So I'm gonna talk about inflation adjustment a little more when we look at the grand list, and it's a little more structured there. So get my PowerPoint up and
Make sure we're getting all that local option tax from our short-term rentals.
hospitality does contribute. It's,
Yeah, assuming they actually charge it.
yeah, it's,
Airbnb, I think automatically does it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if I can get enough to actually present the slideshow. Okay. So, this is a presentation about the history and a little bit about the potential future of Williston's grand list. And, you know, a bunch of caveats on this. The first thing to remember is that every dollar of value on the grand list pays the same tax rate into the municipal taxes. So, you know, what we're gonna talk a lot about tonight is when value goes up on one part of the grand list and down in another, there's a shifting of tax burden. So, you know, you have a budget, you have a certain amount of money you need to raise in taxes, and you have a certain number of dollars of value. And what I'm gonna talk about mostly tonight is how those different values shift around as some things rise in value and others fall. And if you're like me, which you're not, and you live in South Burlington, and there was recently a reassessment of all the property in South Burlington, and the University Mall isn't worth a whole heck of a lot more money than it ever was, but houses are worth a lot more, the tax burden shifts to the residents. And I'm gonna talk about how that might look in Williston. And people get mad, why did my taxes go up? Because your home went up in value and the University Mall didn't. That simple. And different kinds of development generate different amounts of tax revenue and are more or less variable in value. So you'll see some trends around that. Beyond the scope of what I'm talking about tonight, the tax burden is created by spending. So this isn't about how much the town spends or what we spend it on. It's just about how we split the bill once we have a budget approved. And we do have other revenue sources that are affected by its future and its land use decisions. I just talked about the retail tax. And of course, when we're talking about generating service demands, different kinds of development generate different service demands. There's such a thing as smart growth. There's ways to have grand list value come into your town that the service demand exceeds the value you get from it, and there's ways to get grand list value into your town that don't cost so much to service and provide a benefit. We'll talk about that. And I'm only looking at municipal tax. We are not talking about school taxes tonight. We're not talking about homestead versus non-homestead value or averaging / diluting grand list value across the state, which is something that happens. So we're talking about the small number on your tax bill, not the big one, just because it's just easier to put a boundary around this and talk
And
about
we're
it.
not talking about income sensitivity, how much the
No,
state pays.
so, and,
Tax bill.
yeah, remember in your municipal tax line, there is no income sensitivity at all.
Yes, yes.
Everybody pays the
It's the
same.
school tax, sorry.
So no homestead or non-homestead distinction and no income sensitive. Every dollar of value
Yeah.
pays the same percentage to the municipal taxes. So, you know, Williston is grand list wealthy. Right? Lots and lots of value has come into the town over the last 50 years. You sort of think of it like an inheritance or a windfall, and I never really thought of it till I found the apple picture. Like that's really what windfall is, right? Like the wind blew and the fruit fell down, and now you have fruit. So you know, it's something we have that just, you know, when we start putting our tax rate together, there it is. But I encourage folks not to think of it so much as an inheritance. As an investment portfolio, or if that is repugnant to you, a garden. You know, if tomorrow I found a suitcase full of cash on the floor, the worst thing I could do is stick it under the mattress. The best thing I could do is invest it and put it to work for me. And if I want to keep up with inflation, like we just talked about, certainly I don't want to put it in the mattress. And this is just a big wall of numbers. You're not meant to read these right now. But this is what the project was about, which was looking at grand list value across 4 really broad categories: residential, apartment, commercial, and industrial. And then across a number of years. The years are not spaced evenly. It's 2003, 2008, 2016, and this year. And the reason is the first of those 3 years are reappraisal years when things were relatively close to real value. And then 2024 we'll get into in a minute because there's something different going on there. You know, so the history of Williston's grand list is growth and change. You all know this. We love maps. There's 03 to 24. Let's go back and just do it one more time. Sorry, 99 to 04. Boom, boom. And you know, like I mentioned, you really want to adjust things for inflation. So most of the comparisons where I need to talk about change over time tonight, I'm going to use the inflation adjusted numbers because they're different and they show a little bit about how inflation impacts things. And, you know, inflation impacts the town. It affects the cost of everything we do, which is why we're raising this money. So it's important to think about. So this is just real quick. If I don't inflation adjust, there's those 4 components of the grand list in a cumulative area graph. And the salmon colored one on top is residential. It's the biggest category. The little yellow wedge is the inception of apartment commercial. We really didn't have anything on the grand list that was categorized as apartment commercial until after 2003. There were a few out there. But that end of that wedge at the end in 2024, that's about $85 million in grand list value. In a total grand list, it's about $2.16 billion. Industrial's the blue thing that just kind of bumps along. It doesn't really get any bigger or smaller, and green underneath is commercial. So remember, that's not adjusting for inflation. Here's what happens when I adjust for inflation. So the first takeaway is 2016 to 24, boy, is there been a heck of a lot of inflation. So we were increasing value ahead of the rate of inflation from 03 to 08 and 03 to 16, and we weren't doing that in 16 to 24. So that's why we think about inflation.
But Matt,
and-
that doesn't, sorry, does that not take into account the fact that things haven't been reappraised?
This does not take into account the common level of appraisal. So just remembering that up until 16, we're dealing with closer to real numbers.
Right.
And you're right, Jayla, if we take the 69% CLA of 2024, it might not go up as much in my comparison, but it probably goes up a little. That would be actually a good graph to do, is to adjust that for CLA as well. Of course, the other thing that happens is, some of these kinds of properties, there's literally more of them over time. So, that's factored into this as well, and especially so later I can do things like the average assessed value of each type of property and things like that. So just real quick, residential, 2,493 residential properties in 2003, 3,607 in 2024. So you're adding, almost 1,200 residential properties across those 20 years. And you go from 0 apartment commercial to 17. You add a grand total of 1 industrial property across that time span. And you add almost 75 commercial properties across that time span. There's the numbers, how many? Forgot I had that slide, or I wouldn't have spent so much time on that. And this is just a stacked value, just a 100% value. Same thing we were talking about before, but now we're just doing the proportion. So now it doesn't matter whether I do CLA or not. But if I were to reappraise, we're gonna see some other things happen. So $50, why did I find $50? That $85 million in apartment commercial value is worth $50 a year off the taxes of your average residential taxpayer in Williston. So if we didn't have that and we were spending the same amount of money, the average Williston homeowner would pay another $50 a year. It's not much, but it's not nothing. And this is just where those percentages of the grand list come from. So the composition has shifted a little bit, although we're always in the low 60% range in terms of how much of the grand list value is made up by residential properties. I do think that's going to change significantly with reappraisal, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Industrial's gone down as a percentage. Apartment commercial's obviously gone up because it started at 0. It's sitting at 4% now. And commercial has stayed really just a flat, 27, 28% of that. So that's what it looks like in numbers. That's what it looks like in pie charts, just
Having fun with.
So I'm having fun with PowerPoint. People like pie charts. That's just, if you're visual, there it is. There's my $50 again. With that apartment commercial being added in. So we stayed in that low 60% in terms of the tax burden that goes on to your homeowners in Williston. Well, how do we do that? Well, we did it by building over 1,000 more homes. If we didn't build those 1,000 more homes, we would have the residential value, be a shrinking component of that grand list. And everybody, of course, would pay more. We added commercial development, but the overall proportion of commercial value stayed the same. So more commercial stuff, less average value of commercial stuff. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. And then I've talked enough about the little yellow wedge that's worth $50 a year. And so, by way of example, and what do we see coming down the pike? Residential growth feels right now like it's a little bit slower, believe it or not. Certainly the non-apartment residential is slower. Commercial values flat to declining, and the example is Maple Tree Place. Maple Tree Place was on the books for $83 million in our grand list, and it sold for $6 million less than that. We cannot charge them taxes like they're worth $83 million forever into the future now, because they've got a pretty strong case that they're not. So that's $3 more that the average homeowner pays when that $6 million falls off the grand list. Again, it's not much, it's $3 a year. But that's the impact, and this is all things being equal, no change in spending, of course. But that's what that loss of value, is worth, to your average residential taxpayer. Sorry, I went up, not down. Looking. So I talked a little bit about, just what we've seen in the last few years. So in FY 24, we saw permits for 60 dwellings. The 5-year average, for the 5 fiscal years before that was 94. So, when somebody everybody sees a bulldozer somewhere in Williston, say, oh my God, we're overwhelmed with growth. It's out of control. It's faster than it's ever been. We have some numbers that kind of counteract that story, and this is just one of them. So, that's that thing, is like, we know we have growth and change in the future, but what about other things like stagnation or decline? And, what does it look like if that happens? There's total, reported cost of construction for all permitted activity in Williston over, years. So the blue bars are again, previous 5 fiscal years, and the green bar is our FY 24. So, I broke it out by quarters just because we do quarterly reports, but just looking at what's in the red circle there, despite all that inflation, people are reporting they're spending less, than they were. Shayla, what's up?
How much is Finney Crossing, because it wasn't done in the last 5 years, contribute to the blue?
So there's a little bit of Finney Crossing in that 5-year average. So the blue bars, Finney was pretty well residentially done by the end of FY 20, I think. But there was a steadier build out of homes related to that project, and I would say in the short term, as the annex, Summerfield and Glazer get going, you'll probably see this normalize. But we've been predicting those projects were gonna get going for a couple of years now, and again, the experience has just been, things are slower than they used to be. For Chris Snyder to build a home, somebody's gotta wanna buy a home for $629,000, I think, is the townhome price right now. So, there's some issues with that. So, over those last 20 years, we have seen a slowing trend, with new residential. We have this new category, apartment commercial, coming online, virtually no new industrial and little new commercial. What's coming? Well, reappraisal's coming in 2030. Today, we have a 69% CLA, that's common level of assessment. That means that, homes in Williston, properties in Williston are in the grand list at about 69% of the value that they're actually selling for. So this is one of the numbers that the state of Vermont has traditionally used to calculate, the way that different communities contribute to the school funding picture. Because if a community just undervalued all of its properties, it would be undertaxing, and it would be sending less money than it should into that statewide pool. So that's why the CLA number exists. What it means when you're at 69% is we have a $2 billion grand list that ought to be a $3 billion grand list. Well, if we want to go out into the grand list and find that extra $1 billion, are we going to find it equally across all types of property? No. Because some kinds of property have gone way up in value and others have not, and some have gone down. So the burden will shift when you have this reappraisal. This was the single biggest bump in my property taxes in South Burlington ever, was when this happened. So what do we think is going to happen? We think residential value is going to go up. We think industrial value is going to go up, because industrial property is limited and in high demand, and that's what we're seeing in the sales. Commercial is a flat to decrease, and apartment commercial is probably a similar track to residential in terms of its value. So let's try and project that. What if residential went up by 60%? Now, a lot of you might take a look at what your property's assessed for in Williston and multiply it by 1.6 and know that you could probably still sell it for more than that. Our assessor actually recently, one of their staff told me that by the time we hit 2030, that 69% CLA is probably more like a 55% CLA. So it's gonna be a huge change, in value, on those residential properties. But just for fun, what we did here was we went out to 2030, we assumed no inflation, no change in spending on the budget. And then we assumed the highlighted changes in value. So I gotta go find that $1 billion, and this is how I'm gonna try and do it. And obviously, once I get done, adding all that value to the grand list, I can reduce the tax rate, which is great. But I have to increase the average property value, right? So now, if I go back up, my average home. Sorry if I get to, I'm gonna have to go too far back. My average home was worth like under 300 or close to $300,000. Under my new scenario, my average home is assessed at $535,000. So the burden shifts. And this is what happens, if we stay revenue neutral, the property tax on the average home increases $124 a year. And residential goes from being 60% of that portfolio to 67%. That was if I multiplied everybody's assessed value by 1.6. I think I could actually do this more with like a doubling of value, and commensurately, you might see $200 or $225 a year increase on the average property. So that's what the projection looks like if we don't add any properties, which has been the way we've sort of kept the burden spread, right, is you add more. So this is 2024 to 2030, we don't add anymore, we go find the missing $1 billion, and we do it with a modest increase in value that's likely underselling what's really gonna happen. So there's that $124. So what do we do about all that? When I gave this presentation to the select board, what I said is, your homeowners are a lot of your voters. So they're the people who decide whether they can stomach that capital budget, or that operating budget, or that new HR position, are the people who are seeing this burden shift happening, or will see this burden shift happening. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing is there's a whole bunch of things with red check marks on them there that the town's already doing, that are great. So invest in the grand list, invest in good planning, think about value density, think about adding value to the grand list that doesn't cost a lot of money to serve. You're already plowing the road, you can put another $10 million apartment building on that road, great. No added cost to plow that road, $10 million worth of grand list value to tax. Having clear approval paths, and some of the stuff we do here day in and day out in the zoning office is really important. And requiring development to be high quality, so that it holds its value and doesn't become a liability. I think Williston's had a really, really great tradition of doing that, really having exacting standards, not just about like nice looking buildings, but durable infrastructure and things like that as well. And invest in public good that increases property value. So, it's a high amenity town with a high level of service. If I do say so myself, highly qualified, effective personnel who give great service. But what else can we do? Put a golden egg on the slide, what's coming, feed the goose, build infrastructure where and when the town wants it, using the official map tool, create capacity, enhance connections, add amenities, collaborate with the private and nonprofit sectors, housing and economic development, and encourage redevelopment of declining properties. So find a way to do stuff.
Most of that requires investing money.
Yes. That's the feed. Feed means invest. You don't want 5 more Maple Tree places out there. I love Spirit Halloween as much as the next person, but eventually you want that Bed Bath & Beyond building to turn into something that has a higher taxable value and doesn't become a liability. So that's the pitch. Feed the goose. There I am. Thank you very much to the assessor's office for giving me all this data, and I'm happy to share the spreadsheets with folks if you want to plug on numbers. And I'm sure it's after 9, but I'm happy to answer questions too.
Wow, whirlwind tour of the grand list. Very nice, yeah.
I didn't even take a drink in between
Yeah.
any of that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to take on, but
What if the market crashes though,
so.
nationally, like,
Then I can buy a house.
okay, 2008 level.
So 2008 level,
Emily's like, yeah.
I mean, yeah, 2008 is when I bought my house. Thank God.
Yep, me too.
So what we experienced was, new projects didn't launch,
Mhm.
unless somebody had a really clear path forward. Some, materials and labor costs go down, and there are sometimes folks who work into that. So, 2009 was when Chris Snyder started really putting work into Finney Crossing and really trying to get it on a path toward launching. I think the first building had occupancy in 11.
Mhm.
So there are some players who can, have capacity to come in and take advantage of that. But generally, new housing starts plummet. I mean, this was also 08 was like banks aren't loaning anybody money.
Yeah, that was
Um,
unusually deep and broad.
but if you could get a loan, interest rates were great.
Yes.
So, for some people, there was an opportunity. Traditionally, down economies, and I'm not predicting this if the market crashes in the near future, down economies are when governments come in and invest. Because they have the capacity. It's when public housing gets built. It's when, infrastructure gets built. It's when you have something like the Biden, Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically just a massive New Deal-esque investment in public infrastructure. I don't see that wave of investment coming if the market crashes in the next 4 years. I don't necessarily know that the town would be able to do a lot. I mean, what Williston did in that post 2008 world, we didn't expand hardly at all. Everybody just kind of hunkered down. And you might have kind of a quiet period where that's what happens. I think the burden shifting in the grand list would still happen. And, I think unfortunately that same burden shifting is happening statewide, which means this does affect the big piece of your tax bill as far as school funding is structured right now. And it affects affordability big time. So I think you do see that. So, yeah, and obviously, we do get a big chunk. We get about 27% of our budget from the local option sales tax. There is a recognition that that's volatile. Although sometimes in a down market, it's not so much that people buy less, it's that they change what they buy, and that can, if we're selling the right things in Taft Corners, that can actually be okay. But yeah.
Did you?
The
business-
hotels, I'm sorry, Jill, go ahead.
I was just gonna, in 2008, how many like big box stores and businesses were in Taft Corners? Was there a lot of that already built? I wasn't in the States,
That was
so
pretty much all
That was
there.
all there, yeah.
did any of
But
that
what-
get impacted?
Yeah, I mean, so what did happen is nationally, Linens and Things, Toys R Us, and Circuit City all went bankrupt.
Okay.
And then AC Moore came in and then AC Moore went bankrupt. So typically those stores do okay in Williston. They're usually the last ones to close, because there's not another 2 exits down the highway. In Williston, like there is in a lot of places, but we do see nationally, if any of those retailers are weak, a down economy takes out a whole slew of them. And we definitely experienced that. And those vacancies were lengthy. I think Toys R Us was empty for a couple of years, and
That was a long time.
yeah, AC Moore was empty for a couple of years, Bed Bath and Beyond has been empty for a couple of years. So there's volatility in the grand list value and in the total, the taxable sales that happen.
I was gonna ask, hotels, what, we, we have, you mentioned the high occupancy rate, but also I'm curious, what is, there's not a specific hotel tax in Williston, it's just the straight, but do they pay the local option tax?
They do pay the local option tax.
Okay.
So, like I did a back of the envelope on the new hotel at Finney, and I was using that lower, like 65% occupancy rate, and I was probably underselling the room rate at, $250 a night or something. It, with the grand list value and the local option of a hotel like that, the average homeowner sees about a $6 benefit a year for that.
Right.
So
Okay.
it, even one hotel does generate quite a lot of revenue, and yeah, they can be volatile on travel too, for
Right,
sure.
right.
If there's a pandemic.
Pandemic. Yeah.
So
That was very.
Airflow, next
illuminating.
up. Matt, what is going on at the Allenbrook School in that space? Is that just what, like,
the stormwater upgrade,
yeah, okay.
Everyone.
And that doesn't affect at all any of the possibilities of using that as park space.
no, what's happened is, everywhere we thought we were gonna build rec facilities behind the Allenbrook School is wet. So back to the drawing board.
Because they didn't mow it for many years, right?
Yeah,
And rained a lot, we're in the same boat as the solid waste district.
CSWD, exactly.
I read about that, yeah.
But what the construction over there is just expanding the stormwater treatment to meet the new state rules.
All right.
The rumors abound at Allenbrook among the second graders on what it actually is.
Oh.
I was just hoping that it was going to address some of the wetness in the back, but no.
I heard they found dinosaur bones.
Did you want to approve your minutes from?
I don't think we had much change. I didn't see any changes needed because it was the public meeting. Oh, except I think I added one person.
Oh, great.
I may not. Was that Scott Luria who came in
Yes.
late? Okay, because his name was not on there.
Okay.
So I added him, and that's literally the only change that I made. Great. Do we have enough people? Yeah, we can still.
Yeah, we do.
We can. I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second,
All in favor? All right,
All right.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
hey,
guys,
everyone.
None of you have to come back here at 7 tomorrow morning.
No, I got my grades in at noon today.
So you're-
Therefore,